Are any of you involved in education in any way? Okay, all those who didn't raise your hands. This is Ed Summit. Ed Summit. The big question I have for you is what principles are you following when you're doing your training, when you're doing your education? Is it based on fad? I mean, that's what this guy's doing. How's that going? Opinion. A lot of people have opinions about the way we should do our training. And of course, there's the politics. You know, if you want to get along here, this is how we do it. And then there's also just tradition. This is the way I've always done it, and I say we keep doing it. We have a strong tradition here. What we're going to talk about today is the most important thing, and that is to make sure that our training is based on evidence. We are in this unique window of the last 10 years where all the research is coming in and saying this works in training. Much better. Huge gains in learning if you'll just conform and you'll do it this way. That's what's great about real evidence, about real research, about large studies, right? So here we go. There's a few principles, we're talking about principles that we need to have very clear before we move into the actual guidelines. We all want to be on the same page as we talk about this. One of those principles is that it turns out that the brain has to construct knowledge. We used to have this delivery model of education. We deliver the training, and they receive the training, and you have been trained. So it's interesting that education and learning are very different, aren't they? I'm an educator. I'm involved in education. Is there any learning going on? That's a completely different word. Our emphasis should be on learning. Is there learning going on? Not is there education going on? So this idea is that the brain is under construction. It's constantly trying to construct knowledge, and it has to go through a lot of these principles, a lot of these processes, and we have to kind of know what they are in order to be on the same sheet of music here today. So one of those is dual channel. We're going to be talking about these later. I just want to introduce them. The next one is limited capacity. I think we can all already know what limited capacity is about. And the other one is active processing. Right? So let's take a look at each one of those for a minute, okay? Dual channel is kind of interesting, you may have guessed this, is that we have two major channels that our brain uses for taking in information. The one channel is for our ears, auditorial, right? And the other is pictures, pictorial kind of information. We have two different channels, and we'll refer back to this, how fascinating it is when we really learn to use both channels effectively. The next one is limited capacity, right? Does anyone figure out what that is? Maybe some of you are in radiology and you know what this is. Limited capacity is all about working memory. It turns out we have an extremely limited, small working memory. It's phenomenal how small it is. We'll be talking about it a little later. But we need to understand that principle that's out there. We'll be referring to it. And this last one of these three about the brain being under construction, this construction view of education, is that it's called active processing. And basically it means that the world has so much information in it that it's overwhelming. Does he seem overwhelmed? He's like that 24/7. Can you imagine being that creature? Well, we have to decide what we're going to process because we cannot process it all. There's just too much to process in the world. So active processing. Well, that leads us now with those principles, that leads us to the big view of what's going on in the mind when we're learning. If you understand those three basic ideas, then we can construct this overall cognitive theory of learning. So this is the big cognitive theory. And the way it works is we have these two channels. See, we're already seeing our dual channels with the top and bottom rows. We have two channels of information coming into the mind. And believe it or not, we call that multimedia. I thought multimedia was much more than that. Turns out it's just, are they hearing something? Are they seeing something? That's multimedia. Well, they go into our mind in different ways. Our ears, right, obviously with words, but words can also be spoken, and they can be text, so it can come in to our eyes as well. Well, that has to get into our working memory. This is that limited space we talked about. So sound comes in, and we have to create a verbal model of the sound. We don't know what the sounds are until our brain works it, creates a unique model somehow in our mind, and gets meaning out of it. Has anyone ever heard a sound and went, what in the world? What is? You kind of concentrated on it a minute, and you go, oh, I know what that is. I know what that is. That's your brain actually creating a model so that it can understand what you've heard. Well, same thing happens with images, and this happens to me a lot more often than with sound. I look at something and I go, what is that? I don't know, my brain's just wired that way. I just cannot recognize things right away. And I just kind of keep staring at it, and then it's like a game with me. I'm going to figure out what that is. Until finally, oh, that's the end of a shoe nail, and it's hanging over at the end of my desk. And it's just some weird object. I just couldn't figure it out. The brain was quickly trying to make a model of it and trying to figure out what it is so that it knows what it is. Well, that's great. It's in our working memory now, but our working memory is so limited. We just have seconds to work with our learner while they have this verbal and pictorial model. It turns out that the only way information is useful to us at all is if it's in our long-term memory. Because working memory is so short, it's really useless there. We have to use that to try to create these correct models. So how do we get it into long-term memory? Well, it turns out the only way to get it in there is to hook it to prior knowledge. Have you ever tried to teach someone something to someone and they don't have very much prior knowledge and they come back as if they had learned nothing? You should come over to my folks' house and work with them on their new tablet sometime. It is fascinating that you can go back and start at 0 where the power button is. It's just nutty. And show me that email thing one more time. Go, Dad, you know what email is. Can't you attach that to the old concept of mail? No, it's just too different. He grew up in the 30s, dials, knobs, gauges, a wood lathe, a metal lathe. I mean, the guy does it all. But you change that interface on him and whoo, it's gone. So I told my sons, look, it's not about learning, okay, with Grandpa and Grandma. It's not about learning. It's about the experience to be with them for an hour. But we don't have that luxury. We can't. We're not going to have those experiences for an hour and then go back and say, let's do it again. Right? So this is so important. We have to connect to long-term memory. Well, how do we do that? Well, so let's take a look at the active processing. I'm talking about active processing yet, have I? Active processing, selecting. What are ears and eyes going to look at? There's a whole lot going on this page right now, and I'm not sure what I should concentrate on. Have you looked at like a fifth grader's textbook lately? With all the little pop-outs and things come, and there's a 3D holograph thing coming at you, and there's little, and the character's talking, and he's saying things. I just closed the book and just set it back down. I'm exhausted trying to do homework with one of my kids because of the active processing. They're not making it very easy on helping them select what's important. Active processing. Organizing, this is that whole cognitive process we'll talk about, and metacognitive skills, we'll talk about that. And then the whole thing has to be integrated. You think of your prior knowledge as a building that's being constructed, and there's lots of room on the building. Everything's not in place yet. So you can take that structure and start hanging information on it. Oh, you know about such and such, or you're into facets software. Well, we're into this over here, and it's a lot like that because some people with great cognitive learning skills, they kind of know tricks how to do that, and they go, okay, so this is like that, and if I was the software engineer designing this interface, I guess I'm laying it out this way because of this. And you have all these processes that help you learn, but novices not so good at that. Well, on to our very first guidelines. So we're going to go through 8 of these pretty quick, and these are based on empirical data, hard evidence, large, for the most part, large studies that have been done. So number 1, boy, does that seem simple? I thought I'd start with something really simple, but it gets a little deeper. Use words and graphs.